I shall teach you proper manners myself, you wretched creature. The words were full of pure, lofty arrogance. At this point, the whole situation had spiraled so far out of control that even the atmosphere around him felt absurd. Inside, Li Hui was screaming his head off. What kind of ridiculous buff even is that? This isn't even the right skill for a situation like this. Elsewhere in the forest, monster corpses were piled across the ground, their blood soaking the earth and painting the path in thick streaks of red. Something else had already turned this forest into a slaughterhouse. All of those monsters had been killed by one single person. It was Kiss, the captain of the Dark Mercenary Squad. Her unit originally had 10 members, but at the moment, 9 of them were nowhere to be seen, leaving her completely alone in the middle of the carnage. Kiss glanced around in confusion, her expression tightening. Where the hell did everybody go? And why are there this many monsters packed into one place? The deeper she looked, the less normal the whole area felt. Did we take a wrong turn somewhere? Then she spotted Granfell Claudie Arpeggio Romeo in the middle of a standoff with the beast and immediately hid herself, erasing her presence on instinct. Whatever was happening over there, it was dangerous enough that she wanted no part of it. That's a platinum Li Hoyard, and that human is using sword aura. She studied the scene in a flash and clicked her tongue in disgust. Damn it, this looks bad. Very bad. If he can really wield sword aura, then he's obviously a promising player in this leveling mana world. But the thing standing in front of him is a platinum Li Hoyard. That monster is practically a field boss for the entire Yuzra Island region. This was not a fair fight by any sane standard. The moment she understood just how one-sided the matchup was, Kiss made a cold and ruthless decision without letting emotion get in the way. Survival came first. It always did. Forget it. A wave of relief passed through her at once. Moving more slowly than the others had accidentally saved her from having to face that monster herself. My best option is to hurry to the kingdom while that guy keeps the beast occupied. A crooked smirk spread across her face as she reached that conclusion. Sorry, player, but I've got a promise to keep with my own people. In her mind, she recalled the Dark Mercenaries' agreement clearly. Gather at the rendezvous point in 3 days, no matter what happened before then. That promise mattered more than some stranger's life. After being dragged from Arcana to Earth, our miserable lives were supposed to finally improve. We were supposed to start over at the gold mine and live better than before. Seeing a chance to escape with her skin intact, Kiss even started humming lightly as she ran. If I can secure territory here in Yuzra, I can go right back to living like a noble again. That dream was already sparkling in front of her. Just wait for me. My noble life is almost within reach now. Back on the battlefield, Li Hui was on the verge of losing his mind. He clawed at his hair in raw desperation. It's over. We are absolutely finished. Even with sword aura, the level gap was still 74. And unlike the fight against the 7 deadly sins, the natural enemy trait stubbornly refused to activate. In his heart, he whispered a desperate little prayer. Akshin, please. Just this once, I need you to count this thing as a demon. I'm begging you. He pushed his senses to the absolute limit, trying to track every twitch of the beast's muscles. One careless step here would mean getting torn apart and devoured on the spot. Granfell Claudie Arpeggio Romeo and Li Hoyal were both wound-tight, like an overstrained spring. Every nerve in their body was screaming. But no matter how tense they were, they could not remain frozen there forever. Sooner or later, someone had to move first. My stats are definitely higher than before, but keeping sword aura active is draining my stamina way too fast. Then a spark of inspiration flashed through his mind. That's it. Just like the flying tiger before, if I use magic to restrict its movement path, I can control the flow of the fight. In that instant, Granfell Claudie Arpeggio Romeo made his decision. He would test everything at once. There was no time left for hesitation. No room for doubt either. The choice had already been made. This is the perfect moment to test everything I have learned. Therefore, accept this sort of justice. Inside, Li Hui's heart immediately started bleeding from embarrassment. Does anyone actually talk like that anymore? Seriously, who are you trying to impress right now? At that exact moment, the platinum Li Hoyard lunged forward, launching itself straight at the silver-haired man like a streak of living death. Come. Granfell Claudie Arpeggio Romeo stood ready to meet the charge head-on, his blade poised for the clash. Meanwhile, Inside that composed exterior, Li Hoi was shrinking in terror and preparing for the worst. Impossible. I'm going to die. I'm actually going to die here. Oh God, this is really it. And I'm not even getting some tragic insurance payout out of this. Tears streamed through the depths of his soul as panic swallowed every last bit of courage he had left. Mom, Dad, my sisters. I'm sorry. Your ugly son Li Hoi is leaving this world first. The farewell was so sincere and pathetic that it almost felt real. But then, in the very next instant, he froze completely as he stared at what had happened in front of him. Huh. Why was the leopard already lying on the ground? It had been over in an instant. One moment, it was charging, and the next it was flat on the earth, completely defeated. The outcome was so abrupt his brain could barely catch up. He stood there, baffled to the core. Why? Why was that leopard moving as slowly as a turtle just now? Compared to the fear he had felt, the reality in front of him was almost laughably one-sided. Li Hoi stared blankly at the beast's corpse. There had been no attribute advantage and a level difference of 74, yet the fight ended in a single strike. Then the truth hit him all at once. So this is it. This is the overwhelming power of sword aura in a leveling mana world. It was not just strong. It was absurd. After cutting down the formidable enemy, Grandfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo let out a scoff full of elegant disdain. Hardly enough to warm up my muscles. The line sounded impossibly cool, especially considering what had just happened. Looking at his nearly empty energy bar, Li Hoial could only stare in disbelief. You talk way too big for someone who's basically running on fumes. We need to rest, you idiot. Later, the scene shifted to the Sky Garden. It was finally the day of the promised meeting. Matthew was already there, waiting for his honored guest. On the surface, he looked composed, but beneath that calm exterior, anxiety simmered quietly. He had been more curious about this meeting than he wanted to admit. Li Hoial, the player personally acknowledged by Marcelo, what kind of man is he really? Matthew wondered to himself. Then a heavy thud echoed nearby, announcing someone's arrival before the figure even fully appeared. The sound alone carried a strange weight. Grandfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo emerged at last, his steps slow and heavy, his bearing naturally imposing. Even the simple act of walking made him seem like someone who carried a pressure all his own, as though the space around him bent slightly to make room. When he finally spoke, his voice came out low, steady, and commanding. It was the kind of voice that made people listen before they even thought about resisting. "Are you the High Mage?" he asked. The wizard answered without delay. "Indeed, I am Matthew Dinka, senior mage of the Dark Magic Circle, and you must be Li Hoial." As he spoke, Matthew studied him in silence. It feels as though the ground itself trembles under every step he takes. He truly is an extraordinary existence. Then Grandfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo offered a perfect bow, every detail of his etiquette flawless. "Yes, it is an honor to meet you." Though Matthew looked calm on the surface, the mana within him trembled faintly. Meanwhile, Li Hoial was busy remembering the savage fight with the beast and the brutal training that came before it, all while feeling his energy sink lower and lower. Fate is cruel. My whole body is screaming right now. I pushed too hard practicing sword swings and releasing aura. Now my body is shaking so badly, it's honestly a miracle I'm still standing. Yet somehow, by summoning every scrap of willpower he had, he forced himself to maintain Grandfell's noble posture. To suppress the pain and keep the act intact, he took another step forward. "So what business do you have with me?" Matthew gestured politely and formally toward a seat. "Please, sit first." But at that exact moment, the black ring on Matthew's finger began to glow with an eerie and unnatural light. The mage's eyes widened immediately. Something had just reacted. It was the artifact of resonance, a tool capable of measuring a person's sensitivity to dark magic. In less than a second, the ring darkened completely, turning pitch black as if it had been dipped into the deepest part of the night. The reaction was far beyond normal. I have never seen darkness this deep in my entire life." Matthew could barely get the words out. He stared in absolute shock, his mind struggling to process what the artifact was telling him. Even as a high mage, this was beyond anything he had expected. What kind of monstrous existence was hiding inside this man's soul? The question rose in Matthew's mind with genuine fear and fascination, because whatever he was sensing now did not feel remotely human or ordinary. Disbelief spread across Matthew's face like a thin layer of frost, and his eyes would not leave Grandfell Claudie Arpeggio Romeo for even a second. Across from him, Lihoy was fighting for his life just to stay upright and keep his expression steady through the crushing exhaustion. One man was stunned by what he sensed, while the other was barely holding his body together through sheer force of will. Why is he staring at me like that? Lihoy thought, inwardly panicking. At this rate, I need to sit down before I collapse right here in front of him. Then, without warning, an old memory floated up from the depths of his mind. A bitter scene from long before any glory, back when he had been shoved face first into the dirt by a malicious bully. The humiliation came back with painful clarity. The bully had sneered down at him with a twisted grin. "Oh, Mr. Muse, my apologies. That must have hurt." Even while Muse lay there in the dust, humiliated and dirty, the mockery from the surrounding classmates never let up for a single moment. Their laughter had been sharp, casual, and merciless. "Why are you so clumsy?" one of them said with open scorn. "Don't tell me you're planning to waste all those precious materials again." Another laughed and added, "Why are you so obsessed with that primitive cursed magic? Even my dog could do better with that trash." Their contempt piled up endlessly, each word meant to grind him down a little more. What a pathetic excuse for sorcery. But even then, Muse refused to break. His eyes burned with stubborn determination, and somewhere under all that humiliation, a fierce promise took root. He would accomplish something great. A spell dismissed as some vulgar little curse. Would a true scholar really deny its worth without understanding it? "I will prove the real value of this magic to every fool who laughed at me." And at last, the day came in the Academy's Grand Hall, where Matthew stood before the crowd to present the work of his life, dark magic. He explained the theory with meticulous care, then moved on to demonstrate its practical use. Every gesture was precise, every word deliberate, as though he were laying out his heart on the table for the entire Academy to judge. With only a controlled amount of mana, one can animate a corpse so naturally that it appears alive, he explained. Because it relies on an energy source different from conventional magic, it can address problems that standard spell formulas cannot even touch. He had barely finished when a furious shout ripped through the hall like a blade. Preposterous. The high-ranking professors seated in the front row erupted all at once, their outrage filling the chamber. "What is this abomination doing in our sacred academy? How dare you drag such filth into this conference? Throw him out. Get lost, Matthew. Have you finally gone mad?" Matthew tried to speak over them, desperate to defend his work. "Don't reject it out of blind disgust. Look at the formula itself. Look at its essence. This solves the dimensional interference problem that ordinary magic cannot handle," he insisted, refusing to retreat. "I have found the answer to world convergence." But seeing Matthew continue to defend what they considered heresy, the professors turned toward the headmaster instead, demanding a verdict. "Sir, there is no reason to listen to this garbage any longer. Please make a decision now. No matter how much you value diversity of research, this has crossed every line." Yet through all the anger and noise, the headmaster simply remained calm. Ignoring the uproar completely, he looked at Matthew and smiled with quiet gentleness. "Matthew, have you given this magic a name yet?" The professors shifted restlessly, unable to believe what they were hearing, but Archmage Matthew froze where he stood. Out of everyone in that grand hall, only the headmaster had chosen to actually listen. Slowly, he straightened his back, and a sense of dignity returned to him. His whole body trembled with emotion as he spoke of the magic he considered his spiritual child. "From this day forward, I shall call it dark magic." And so, dark magic was formally accepted and taken up by other mages as well. For a brief moment, it seemed as if Matthew's faith had finally been rewarded. But that first flash of glory did not last long. Before long, Matthew sank into despair. "I truly believed dark magic could solve the problem of dimensional interference. I believed I had finally found the path forward. Yet that hope slowly began to rot away under the weight of failure. But a full year passed, and my research did not advance even a single inch." The words carried the bitterness of someone who had exhausted every avenue and watched all of them end in silence. His frustration had long since curdled into helplessness. Then, 1 year later, the Demon Tower appeared on Earth as the interference worsened, and Matthew found himself cornered completely. The crisis he had wanted to prevent was already here, and he stood at a dead end, starving for any kind of breakthrough that might still matter. There has to be some way to stop this, he had thought, over and over again. But I cannot do it alone. At that point, I was drowning in hopelessness, destroying myself because I could do nothing to halt the merging of the worlds. It was the kind of despair that hollowed a person out from the inside. It was a miserable state to be in, but then he met Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo, and everything changed. Never in his wildest imagination had he expected to encounter someone with such an enormous and terrifying affinity for dark magic. The moment he sensed it, a new hope burst into life inside him. With this young man, he believed he might finally be able to shatter the limits that had trapped his research for so long. Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo calmly took his seat, lifted his teacup, and took a quiet sip before speaking in a cool, measured voice. "Hi, Mage. Does the light on your ring have something to do with the matter you wish to discuss today?" His tone was polite, but distant enough to remind Matthew exactly who was controlling the pace of the conversation. "I can spare you only 1 hour." The words were simple, but they landed with absolute authority, making it clear that every second from here on was a privilege. "My tea is getting cold." At that, Matthew immediately realized how badly he had let himself drift off track. He lowered his head at once, aware that his silence and staring had already crossed into rudeness. "Please forgive me. These rings are used to measure a person's sensitivity to dark magic. In other words, their aptitude for the dark arts. However, this is the first time I have ever seen them turn such a deep, abyssal black." Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo raised one eyebrow slightly. Dark magic, somehow that term sounds familiar. In a world built like a leveling manual, words like that were not especially rare. Matthew continued with growing focus. "It functions differently from the magic you are already familiar with." As he spoke, he began demonstrating the flow of that energy right there in the room, shaping the explanation with visible magical motion to make the difference unmistakably clear. If conventional magic is power made manifest through discovery, calculation, and mana manipulation, then dark magic draws on something else entirely. It uses the darkness inside a person as fuel. That was the core distinction, and to Matthew, it was the most important truth of all. It is a strange and alien source of power, unlike anything accepted by orthodox magical theory. As he spoke, he watched Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo closely, studying even the slightest reaction in that silver-haired noble's face. Matthew's voice remained steady, but his eyes were intense. This magic is fueled by the subject's mind, more specifically, by their past. The deeper the pain, the darker the trauma, the more devastating the resulting power can become. Matthew's body trembled slightly as the implication sank deeper into him. "But if your sensitivity is truly this overwhelming, then your past, Mr. Li Hoi. I am honestly afraid to imagine what kind of horrors you must have endured." Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo fell silent and sank into thought. The darkness within the past. The idea did not leave him unmoved. Even his stillness seemed heavier for a moment, as if the words had touched something he could not immediately dismiss. Meanwhile, inside that elegant silence, Li Hoi was screaming. "I knew it. I absolutely knew it. He's talking about my dark history." The thought alone was enough to make his soul curl up in agony. This is so embarrassing. This isn't dark magic. This is social execution magic. The more he thought about it, the worse it got. Then Li Hoi realized Matthew could not possibly know the original character settings behind Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo. That should have been comforting, but somehow it only made the second-hand embarrassment even more unbearable. Even so, the cringe was almost physically painful. Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo's brow furrowed, and his imposing aura sharpened at once. Digging into someone's past the very first time you meet them, the room suddenly felt colder under the pressure of his displeasure. "Is that your idea of proper manners?" Matthew looked horrified the moment the words left Granfell's mouth. "Forgive me. I was deeply disrespectful." The apology came out fast and sincere, stripped of all pride. "Through my carelessness, I committed a grave indiscretion," Matthew said, bowing low without hesitation. "I will report myself to the Council of Elders and formally request disciplinary action." Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo could only stare for a moment. almost at a loss for words at how far the man was willing to take it. You are taking this far too seriously. Even so, after a brief pause, he chose to accept the apology rather than press the matter further. I accept your remorse. The words were measured, controlled, and deliberately generous. A faint, aristocratic smile touched his lips. The spirit of inquiry is one of a true scholar's finest virtues. He spoke as if granting judgment from a place far above ordinary offense. I do not dislike a scholar who remains that loyal to his craft. Matthew was left speechless. No one had ever spoken to him like that before. Not with understanding, not with respect, and certainly not with that kind of calm acknowledgement. What surprised Matthew even more was Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo's genuine curiosity about how the power actually worked. The silver-haired noble asked in an even tone, however, if dark magic draws from a different source than ordinary magic, does that mean it can still be used when one's mana has been completely exhausted? It was not a casual question. It cut straight to the heart of practical application. The moment he heard that, Matthew seized Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo by the shoulders in open excitement, forgetting all restraint in an instant. His reaction was so immediate, it was almost explosive. Are you interested in the dark arts? Then would you consider walking this path of research with me? Matthew asked, practically trembling with hope. Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo fell silent at once, the sudden intensity of the invitation dragging him into an awkward sense of déjà vu. This feeling, this situation, wait, I've definitely seen this exact scene before, he thought. Instantly, he remembered Harkon asking almost the same thing in nearly the same tone. Will you join me on the endless journey of the sword? Then, as if to punctuate the absurdity of it all, a system notification suddenly appeared before him. Number of high mages convinced. 9. Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo showed the faintest sign of surprise. The count had gone from 8 to 9. So Matthew counts 2? Without lingering on it, he turned to leave, his cape sweeping behind him in a smooth arc. My time is up. His departure alone felt theatrical. I will contact you again later. Inside, Lihoy released a huge sigh of relief. Good, objective complete. Let's get out of here already. If I stay any longer, I'm seriously going to end up locked inside this tower for life. Matthew did not stop him. Instead, he simply bowed his head and said, thank you. Later, back in Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo's laboratory in the Magic Tower, the mood shifted again. The moment he returned, he went straight back to work as if nothing had happened. Lihoy, meanwhile, was completely drained. I have to share a body with a workaholic like this? The second we got back, he already opened a book. There wasn't even a moment to breathe. I'm exhausted, truly exhausted. But before he could even sit with that misery for long, messages from the high mages started pouring in one after another, all of them expressing goodwill, greetings, and formal welcome to the Magic Tower. The flood of recognition was impossible to ignore. The quest to win over the mages had succeeded completely. Lihoy felt a hard rush of dopamine hit him all at once. All the high mages have acknowledged me now. The reality of it sent a thrill through him despite the exhaustion dragging at every part of his body. Just as expected from a man with legendary influence, he thought with swelling satisfaction. Then the familiar system chime rang through his mind, bright and clear, as if confirming that the world itself agreed with him. Rewards granted. His influence within the Magic Tower had skyrocketed, and along with it came newly unlocked administrative functions that had previously been hidden from him. Lihoy could not hide his delight at all. The Magic Tower was not some minor guild or local faction. It was a national-level power. Gaining leverage here meant gaining a hand on the wheel of history itself. And now that entire institution was practically resting in his palm. First the kingdom of Usura, and now the tower as well. Granfell Claude Arpeggio Romeo merely gave a cold scoff and flicked the notification away like it was worthless. Meaningless. Instantly, Lihoy screamed inside. Hey, can't we enjoy this for even 1 second? Just once. Why could they never be on the same wavelength? Still, the lure of new rewards pulled him in again. New features. He opened the status window, only to freeze at what appeared next. What the hell is this? The news cycle outside was exploding. The First Nation from Arcana had now manifested in reality, and the implications were enormous. Capital was pouring into the kingdom of Yuzura like a tidal wave, massive and unstoppable. Money, influence, and opportunists were converging all at once, turning the kingdom into the center of a rapidly growing storm. Even the Shin Guild and the Berserker Guild are going all in. The scale of the movement made it clear that this was no temporary frenzy. The major players had already decided there was too much value here to ignore. On the broadcast, the anchor turned toward an invited expert and asked in a tense, excited voice, "Professor, what is your view on this phenomenon of leveling mana becoming reality?" The question hung in the air like the opening of a much larger crisis, one the whole world was now being forced to face. The expert slowly adjusted his glasses, his expression sharpening as the studio lights reflected across the lenses. For a brief moment, the entire broadcast seemed to pause around that small gesture, as if everyone was waiting for the weight of his answer to settle over the room. "A stroke of genius," he said at last. "They are not merely buying land. They are buying the future itself, and that future has already begun." Tamman stared at the screen without blinking, his attention fully hooked. Wait, didn't the Shin Guild jump from rank 5 to rank 3 not long ago? The timing suddenly felt far too meaningful to ignore. Nam Chanmin said nothing. He remained perfectly still, his gaze fixed but distant, as if the world around him had gone quiet while his thoughts sank somewhere much deeper. There was only one thing turning over and over in his mind. How do we repay Li Hoyal? In the end, that was the only question that mattered to him. Tamman glanced his way, read the heaviness in his brother's face, and slowly nodded. "You're right. We would never be standing here like this without him." The words came out with quiet certainty, stripped of exaggeration because none was needed. That much was simply true. A shadow from their darker past flickered across his mind. If Li Hui hadn't stepped in, you would still be. He cut himself off before finishing the thought, but the silence said enough. And on top of that, he was the one who told Shin to invest in Yusra in the first place. He saw all of this coming before anyone else did. On the news ticker below the screen, two names dominated everything. Yusra and Grandfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo. It's all centered on him. Tamman clenched his fist as fresh resolve rose in his chest. "Fine, then I'll make sure the reconstruction is nothing less than legendary. If this kingdom was tied to Li Hui's vision, then he would make sure it was rebuilt in a way worthy of that trust. We have to live up to his expectations. Nam Chanmin, we cannot afford to become a burden to him now." Tamman reached over and nudged him, snapping him out of that deep trance of thought and pulling him back into the moment. The Shin Guild's rise should have been a reason for celebration, but the comment section online was already turning poisonous. Why aren't they working with the Mythology Guild? Netizens demanded over and over. Nam Chanmin's eyes narrowed at once. Tamman gave a short, irritated scoff, already tired of the direction the conversation was taking. "Here we go again. Mythology is clearly trying to drive a wedge between us. Same old media manipulation, just with a new coat of paint." But even that was not the end of it. Shin let out a quiet sigh. Mythology's cheap tricks are nothing new, but this time they've even dragged the National Assembly into it. The mention made Tamman frown. What can a pack of politicians even do in an awakened era like this? Mythology may be a giant in the business world, but buying out the government too? That should not be possible, not even for them. "That is exactly what worries me," Chanmin replied darkly. "This feels like something far beyond simple bribery." The situation had started to smell rotten in a much deeper way. So how, exactly, did mythology get lawmakers on a leash? While that question lingered in the air, elsewhere, a golden badge gleamed faintly from the lapel of a suit. But the man wearing it was foaming at the mouth, his body trembling as his fate hung in eerie uncertainty. Around him, a sinister purple miasma twisted and coiled through the air like living poison. It clung to him in thick, unnatural waves, turning the entire scene into something grotesque and deeply wrong. Watching it all with a cold, satisfied smile was Queen John, the guild master of mythology. Her expression held no pity whatsoever, only calm amusement, as if she were observing something that had unfolded exactly the way she intended. She lifted her phone and spoke without taking her eyes off the scene. "Secretary Kim, clear my schedule for tomorrow." "Ma'am, but you have the summit with Senator Choi," the secretary answered nervously, clearly caught off guard. John gave no reply. Her eyes were already fixed on a photograph of Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo, and that silence itself was enough to feel like a command. The silence on the other end stretched for only a second, but it carried absolute authority. Understood, the secretary answered immediately, not daring to press any further. Shall I send your apologies to the senator? The secretary asked carefully. John slowly licked her lips, and in the next instant her appearance changed. Her hair turned a pure, unnatural silver, and demonic horns pushed through at her temples with smooth, dreadful certainty. The shift made her look less like a person and more like a predator revealing its real skin. A hunter's smile spread across her face. No need. I'm going to the kingdom of Yusra. There is a certain man there I am dying to meet. Back at the magic tower, meanwhile, sunlight poured down so brightly, it almost hurt the eyes. The mood could not have been more different. Then, without warning, a hologram flickered to life. New feature unlocked. Behind Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo, Li Hui's spirit avatar floated into view, shimmering faintly like a strange companion that had finally decided to reveal itself. The sudden appearance made the whole moment feel bizarrely ceremonial. Romeo's eyes widened slightly. A new feature, finally. For the briefest moment, there was real anticipation there. But that tiny victory was ruined almost immediately by a harsh, violent buzzing that shattered the calm. Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo flinched and turned toward the vibrating smartphone with visible distaste, as though it were not a device but some cursed artifact that had crawled out of a sealed tomb. The sound alone was enough to sour his mood. Make it stop, Li Huial groaned inwardly, already exhausted. Who keeps calling at a time like this? He leaned over and peeked at the screen, bracing himself for disappointment the moment he saw the name. It's my sister again. What does she want this time? Outwardly, Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo simply lifted his teacup and sipped with perfect aristocratic indifference, as if the nuisance had nothing to do with him. Then, whoosh, a piece of parchment flew through the air and stopped right in front of him, hovering in place with magical insistence. Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo slowly set his cup down. It was a missive from the tower, and the timing could not have been worse. His expression made it very clear that his patience for interruptions was already thin. The paper trembled once, then a voice echoed out from the script as though the letter itself had come alive. The sound filled the room with formal, artificial cheer. Greetings, Li Huial. Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo raised one eyebrow, his face instantly taking on that familiar look of cool irritation. He already suspected this was not going to be brief. I am the chief mage, the one who has been attempting to contact you. Since you ignored my digital messages, I took the liberty of sending this scroll instead. Please forgive the intrusion. Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo's expression darkened further, but the scroll continued on as if it had no sense of danger. As a co-researcher of the tower, your standing is equal to that of a chief mage. You are family now. The wording alone was enough to make the whole thing feel even more suspicious. I have also prepared a pledge of, suddenly the voice warped and cut into another one entirely. Adventurer Li Huial, it is an honor to meet you. I am Ben Graham. The shift was so abrupt it felt like a magical broadcast had just been hijacked. I have a gift prepared for you. Hello. I am also a senior adventurer. Please notice me. In an instant, the scroll turned into a chaotic radio full of desperate mages shoving their voices forward one after another. Li Hui felt his soul start drying up on the spot. What is this nightmare? Real-life spam mail? This is horrifying. His survival instinct immediately took over. Run. Just run, Granfell. Claudia Arpeggio Romeo did not waste even half a second hesitating once that thought landed. Flight was now the most reasonable response available. He turned on his heel and fled with maximum elegance, speed walking away from the chorus of magical fanboys, while still somehow preserving his noble dignity. The entire retreat looked absurdly graceful. Scene change. The royal palace of Yusra stood radiant beneath the sun, all gold and marble and polished grandeur. Harkon chuckled the moment he spotted the exhausted mage arriving, as if seeking sanctuary from the rest of the world. It did not take much to guess that Granfell had run here to escape something. Are they truly that burdensome? Harkon asked, amused, as though he already knew the answer and simply wanted to enjoy hearing it out loud. Harkon's grin only widened. So, How does it feel to be the idol of the magic tower? There was not even a hint of pity in his voice, only warm, merciless teasing. Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo remained completely stoic, refusing to give him the reaction he wanted. Harkon waved one hand lightly and continued, "Don't be too hard on them. In their own way, it is how they show respect to a superior intellect." Steam curled softly from Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo's tea, the only visible sign of warmth anywhere near him. "I have no interest in flattery," he replied coldly, "especially when it disguises itself as sincerity." Harkon burst into loud laughter at that answer, clearly delighted rather than offended. To him, this was exactly the kind of response he had expected. "That is exactly why you are who you are," Harkon said, still grinning. "Even the demon of greed collapsed before that unshakable ego of yours." Then his tone shifted slightly as he leaned closer. "Speaking of that," his eyes gleamed with renewed interest. "Have you seen the footage the Shin Guild released? It captured your battle perfectly." Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo froze at once. The teacup in his hand gave a faint rattle, the smallest crack yet in his composure. "Footage?" Buzz. The phone vibrated again at the exact worst moment. This time it really was his sister. "Ow," Lee Hoyo realized with dawning horror. "I completely forgot to text her back. That explained far too much all at once." "Is something wrong?" Harkon asked, watching him carefully now. "Excuse me for a moment," Granfell Claudia Arpeggio Romeo replied before answering the call. "Sister." The moment the connection opened, the screen practically exploded with rage. "Stop it," Leah screamed, her face filling the screen so completely it was almost an attack in itself. Her fury came through with such force that even the air around the call seemed to shake. "You are not a demon hunter. You are not a noble. Snap out of it. You Chinibu, final monarch of the kingdom of Yuzura." On screen, Lurong appeared with a bright grin, and Unanimous quickly followed behind. "Lurong, don't climb on your aunt. It is time to repent for your sins," the three of them shouted together in messy, gleeful unison, turning the call into pure family chaos. Li Yim held up his phone and compared Granfell's stoic expression on screen with the real pose from the footage. Then he burst out laughing and copied the same posture perfectly, with exaggerated seriousness. The mockery was way too accurate to be ignored. "Spot on, right?" He cheered proudly. "Your battle was legendary. You already passed 1 million views on YouTube." Granfell let out a slow sigh as praise for him defeating the sin of greed alone continued ringing in his ears. It really did look like a scene ripped straight out of a leveling manhwa. Even so, he simply swiped the screen away and set the phone aside as though he wanted the entire event erased from existence. Hakuna rested her chin on one hand, while silence briefly settled over the room. Granfell lowered his head slightly, and when he spoke, his voice sounded low, tired, and worn thin in a way that almost made him seem human again. "Is there somewhere, anywhere, where I can rest?" Hakuna smiled with immediate warmth, as though he had been waiting for exactly that opening. "Of course. In fact, while we are on the subject, would you be interested in a position here?" His offer came too smoothly to be casual. "I was thinking perhaps a dukedom, in recognition of your role in establishing the kingdom's foundation. Or maybe a special privilege allowing you to govern territory directly." Granfell replied in the flattest tone possible. "A simple room will do." Inside, Lee Hoyal was screaming so hard he could barely think. "I am genuinely going to die from embarrassment at this rate." The scene shifted soon after to a secluded wooden cabin filled with sunlight and clean air. He opened the door and let the brightness flood in. His suit jacket was placed away neatly, but the moment he started frantically loosening his tie, a tea-tag slipped loose and tumbled to the floor. He collapsed onto the sofa with all the grace of a man whose spirit had finally left his body. His eyes locked onto the screen, and his expression darkened with pure, unspeakable mortification. "I'm going to die of shame. Why are the view counts rising this fast?" He glared at the search results as if hatred alone might erase them. But the numbers only kept climbing, each refresh making the humiliation feel bigger. Granfell's blood boiled hotter and hotter. Who gave the Xenon Guild permission to upload this? I ought to sue every last one of them for illegal filming. Then, all at once, his thoughts stopped cold. Outside, the natural world remained calm and peaceful, but his senses flared sharply. Something had changed. He froze on the spot, his whole body locking up as his eyes widened in alarm. What was that signal supposed to be? It was sudden, sharp, and familiar enough to make his nerves tighten instantly. It was a sensation he recognized all too well, the kind that made his skin crawl before his mind could even catch up. As tiny dust motes drifted lazily through the beam of light, a face mask snapped over his nose and mouth in one quick, practiced motion, almost like muscle memory. With his hair left in a messy state, he muttered under his breath, "Filthy." Lee Hoyle scratched the back of his head with an awkward, sheepish look. "I guess I forgot to clean." But while he was grumbling over that, a far bigger mess was already unfolding at the Archipelago construction site, where tension was beginning to boil over into chaos. Outside the site, a guard stood stiffly in front of the red command tent, keeping watch with wary eyes. The atmosphere around him was tense, like trouble was only a breath away. Inside the tent, Nam Taemin raised a trembling finger and jabbed it toward the glowing screen of his phone. His hand shook so badly it looked like he could barely hold the device steady. "What the hell is this crash? Why are our stocks dropping like this?" he shouted, his voice cracking with disbelief and rage. Across from him, Nam Keelman let out a long, tired sigh, as though he had already expected this storm to come. "It's the Mythology Guild," Nam Keelman said grimly. "They're spreading rumors again." Nam Taemin sucked in a breath in disbelief. "Again? Ever since they got Parliament backing, those bastards have been treating us like we're beneath them." Nam Keelman rubbed his chin slowly, his expression growing more serious as he thought it through. "I suspect they want to secure the reconstruction rewards for themselves before they completely crush us out of the picture." His eyes narrowed. But since when did they gain this much influence? Then, all at once, Nam Taemin's voice cracked as realization hit him. The Xenon Guild, merging with mythology? What kind of insane headline is that? Nam Taemin snapped. "It says merger in the title, but the article itself claims the Xenon Guild master proposed to Beck Yziel, and that I chased after her and practically begged." The words sounded so absurd they almost didn't feel real. At that exact moment, a pair of long legs strode toward the tent entrance, and the guard outside barked sharply, "Halt! You cannot enter." From inside the tent, Nam Taemin was still raging. "I can spread rumors too, you know. Everybody knows I can't stand Beck Yziel." His voice was loud and heated, thick with wounded pride and frustration. "Why? Because she has a huge, hairy rear end," Nam Taemin blurted out, throwing both hands into the air, his face flushed red with anger. Then, in the very next instant, Beck Yziel leaned in close from the entrance, wrapping her arms lightly around herself as she tilted her head. "Oh my, is that really true? And where exactly did you hear something like that?" Her sudden appearance froze every Xenon member in the tent where they stood. All of Nam Taemin's fury vanished at once, replaced by pure horror as he stared at her. Nam Keelman shot upright, so fast his chair nearly tipped. Beck Yziel casually brushed her hair back over her shoulder, a mocking little smile curling at the edge of her lips as if she was enjoying every second of their shock. "You know secrets about my body that even I don't know?" she said sweetly. "Do you have a crush on me?" Cold sweat instantly drenched Nam Taemin's back. "How did she get in here?" "My men are right outside." Nam Keelman rushed to the entrance in a panic. "Impossible." He yanked the red tent flap aside so hard it nearly tore from the frame, then froze in place. Outside, all three bodyguards were sprawled unconscious in the dirt, completely motionless. Nam Keelman's face hardened as he slowly turned back toward the intruder. The last trace of casual composure disappeared from his expression, replaced by grim caution. The full weight of the situation finally sank in. "You do realize what it means to attack our members, don't you?" he said, his tone low and tense, trying to hold on to authority even as the danger in front of him became impossible to ignore. Beck Yziel gave a light, dismissive wave of her hand, as if his accusation was barely worth hearing. "Attack?" she repeated, sounding almost amused. "I didn't touch them. They just decided to take a nap." Her gaze sharpened in the next heartbeat, crashing into Nam Keelman like a physical strike. Panic surged through him. That pressure, it felt horribly familiar. He stared at the woman before him, Beck Yziel, ace of Korea's top financial guild, and his instincts screamed that this was no ordinary confrontation. She was the woman who had taken a guild with no real name, no real standing, and dragged it all the way up to rank 41 almost single-handedly. That kind of rise wasn't normal. It was the kind of thing that left scars on everyone who stood in the way. Nam Taemin pointed at her with a shaking finger and shouted, "Hey, Baek Yziel, what the hell do you think you're doing? You're crossing the line." Baek Yziel said nothing in response, but beside him, Nam Keelman was already drenched in cold sweat. She has Parliament's backing. That alone makes her dangerous enough. But then another thought slammed into him like lightning. No, that's not it. The realization struck so suddenly it made his stomach drop. It's mind control. Pure terror flooded through his veins in an instant, cold and suffocating. It was the kind of fear that made his body feel like it no longer belonged to him. That shouldn't work on awakened players, he tried to say, desperate to warn Nam Taemin before it was too late. But his body refused to move the way he wanted. His muscles locked. His voice died in his throat. He was paralyzed. No need for violence. Baek Yziel purred softly, her voice calm enough to make it even more terrifying. Behind her, a demonic entity began to manifest, oozing out a vicious, malicious aura that filled the tent like poison in the air. The moment Nam Keelman felt its presence, his mind was shoved into absolute chaos. The demon twisted and warped until it took on Nam Keelman's own likeness, wearing his face while laughing in a crazed, broken way. Clawed hands tore at the edges of his sanity, ripping through his thoughts as though his mind were something fragile and easy to shred. Pure horror swallowed him whole. There was no room left in him for reason, pride, or resistance. Only fear so intense it felt bottomless. Then, without warning, Grandfell Claudie Arpius stepped into the clearing outside the tent. The moment he saw the fallen guards sprawled across the ground, he let out a tired sigh and loosened his collar in visible irritation. Inside the tent, both guild masters turned toward the sudden new presence. The shift in the atmosphere was immediate, like the entire scene had tilted in a different direction the instant he arrived. Nam Taemin's finger was still hanging in the air, trembling from the accusation he had been making. Grandfell Claudie Arpius stepped into the tent and ripped off his mask with an annoyed motion, looking as though he had already reached the end of his patience. "I just finished cleaning, and yet filth is still all around me. Unbearable." His voice carried blunt disgust, cold and cutting. Nam Taemin gasped at the sight of him, his face going pale almost instantly. "Brother Lee Hoyle," Nam Taemin started, but Grandfell Claudie Arpius ignored him completely. His razor-sharp eyes moved past him and locked directly onto Baek Yziel with chilling precision. "You are a demon," he said without hesitation. Then he pulled up a file on his phone titled Secret Video, his expression growing even colder as he brought it into view. It was the raw footage from his Pride quest. On the screen, Grandfell Claudie Arpius was staring straight into the camera with overwhelming authority, every word carrying the weight of command. "It is time to correct your mistakes." He replayed the clip again, his eyes burning with deep indignation, as though merely remembering it offended him. Only a true demon would take pleasure in broadcasting that kind of humiliation to the entire world. His tone was severe and absolutely certain, as if there could be no other explanation for such cruelty. Nam Taemin stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, completely unable to process what was happening anymore. The argument had veered so far off course that his mind could barely keep up. Baek Yziel blinked once in visible confusion. Faced with Grandfell Claudie Arpius's abrupt accusation, even she looked momentarily thrown off. Meanwhile, Nam Taemin began stammering, sweat pouring down his face as he tried desperately to read the situation. The video, well. He faltered uselessly. Grandfell Claudie Arpius thrust the phone forward, refusing to let the insult, or what he believed was an insult, pass without consequence. Baek Yziel watched him carefully, and a sinister smile slowly crept across her face. Well, she thought. I came here planning to extract information from Xenon, but now the real target has walked straight into my trap on his own. Completely unaware of the predator's gaze fixed on him, Grandfell Claudie Arpius simply waited. Nam Taemin, on the other hand, was desperately scrambling for words. That video, we only wanted the world to see your greatness. We had no bad intentions at all. Baek Yziel gave an inward scoff, finding the excuse pathetic. So this is the man they call the light of us, she thought coldly. Up close, he looked painfully ordinary. Could someone like this really defeat one of the 7 deadly sins alone? She stepped forward, skepticism dripping from every word. Hey, you said your name is Lee Hoyle? Granfell Claudie Arpius turned to face her, and Beck Yiziel's smirk deepened as she dismissed the legends around him as exaggerated nonsense. She locked eyes with him like a predator sizing up prey. I am Beck Yiziel. Then she stepped boldly into his personal space, her fingers trailing down his tie in a slow, deliberately seductive gesture, testing him without the slightest hesitation. You've heard of me, haven't you? You've definitely caught my interest. Her dark eyes tilted up at him with carefully staged innocence, but the thoughts beneath that pretty expression were poisoned and sharp. What a disappointment, she thought. But he's still useful, just another pawn in the end. If I use him properly, taking control of Yusra will become easy. Yet before that ugly little scheme could settle into place, Granfell Claudie Arpius brushed her hand away with flat, icy indifference. Beck Yiziel froze where she stood, staring down in disbelief at the angry red mark beginning to rise on her skin. The sting was minor, but the insult behind it was enormous, and that was what truly stopped her cold. Granfell Claudie Arpius did not even bother giving her a second glance. Instead, he turned toward the frozen Nam Kielman and spoke as if Beck Yiziel were no longer worth acknowledging. Guildmaster, you look like a statue. Care to explain the situation yourself? Nam Kielman flinched hard, beads of sweat forming along his temple. Ha. Right. He stammered, struggling desperately to regain control and save whatever dignity he still had left. There have been malicious rumors spreading about you, he said carefully, forcing the words out. People are claiming that you only grant privileges to guilds you're personally friendly with. We couldn't just stand by and watch your reputation be damaged by lies like that. So we released that clarification video. He bowed his head, his voice coated in exaggerated remorse. I sincerely apologize. My only intention was to clear your name, but perhaps my methods were short-sighted. Granfell Claudie Arpius crossed his arms, his sharp gaze quietly weighing the apology and searching for weakness in every word. He was just about to pass judgment on Nam Kielman's actions when Beck Yiziel abruptly shattered the tension. Excuse me, Lee Hoyle. Her voice cut in, sharp and offended. How dare you treat me like I'm invisible air? She tossed her curls back, and a flicker of something unhinged flashed in her eyes. I don't recall that being proper etiquette. So how exactly am I supposed to interpret this disrespect? Granfell Claudie Arpius's expression darkened with open annoyance. Oh, so you are familiar with the concept of etiquette, he replied, his sarcasm colder than ice. Beck Yiziel's eyes narrowed into icy slits, her pride visibly flaring. Granfell Claudie Arpius continued in a voice that carried absolute command. I am currently speaking with Guildmaster Shinin. Who taught you that interrupting a conversation was acceptable? At once, Beck Yiziel released her aura in open defiance, refusing to yield even a single step. Technically, you were the one who interrupted my conversation with him first, weren't you? She shot back without missing a beat. On the surface, her tone was playful, almost light, but inside she was smirking with interest. So he actually has some backbone. Good. That makes this more fun. Still, it doesn't matter. As she said that, her eyes slowly began to glow with a sinister crimson light. Every man is prey to a succubus like me, she thought with absolute confidence. An invisible wave of charm magic rolled off her body and surged toward him like a soft, deadly tide. Not even the great Lee Hoyle should be able to resist me. With practiced ease, she lifted a delicate hand to Granfell Claudie Arpius's cheek and purred in a low, tempting voice. Don't you agree? At that exact moment, a system window flashed sharply before Granfell Claudie Arpius's eyes. The warning was immediate and unmistakable. Natural enemy detected. Combat capabilities significantly increased against demonic entities. The message cut through the haze like a blade. Granfell Claudie Arpius's thoughts sharpened in an instant. A natural enemy. So that's it. She's a demon. The conclusion landed fast and clean, and the air around him seemed to grow colder as everything suddenly made sense. Beck Yiziel's pupils narrowed into thin, reptilian slits, no longer looking even remotely human. A suffocating purple aura burst out from her body in waves as she slowly stroked his hair, the gesture intimate on the surface, but full of unmistakable menace underneath. Granfell Claudi Arpius steadied himself at once. This killing intent, it's rising far too quickly. The pressure in the tent thickened so fast it felt hard to breathe. Then, from somewhere outside, a sudden shout ripped through the air and shattered the moment before it could fully turn violent. A swarm of cameramen came charging toward the tent in a noisy stampede, tripping over one another in their rush. "That's the Shinmin tent," one of them yelled. "Keep the cameras rolling. Don't miss a second of this." Another voice shouted over the chaos. "Wait, are those guild members over there?" "No. Look closely, it's Beck Yiziel," one streamer shouted at his screen, eyes wide with excitement. "Guys, you won't believe this. We're live right in front of the Shinmin Guild base." Another yelled even louder. "It's Lee Hoyle. Is that really him?" The moment those words spread through the crowd, the color drained from Beck Yiziel's face. "What?" she blurted, caught completely off guard. Nearby, Nam Kielman adjusted his glasses and let a wicked little smile curl onto his face. Finally, the stage is set, he thought with satisfaction. The sudden shift in control made Beck Yiziel's pulse spike with panic. "What is the meaning of this?" Beck Yiziel demanded, her voice sharp with disbelief. Nam Kielman answered only by flashing a middle finger, his eyes gleaming with sly triumph. "Hey, little Miss Beck, did you really think you were the only one who knew how to manipulate the media?" he muttered under his breath. "Buying up print media won't save you now." In front of him, the streamers leaned in with greedy, hungry expressions, their cameras zooming closer and closer to the scandal. The reporters exploded into a frenzy almost instantly. Beck Yiziel and Lee Hoyle together? Is this real? Look at the viewer count. It keeps shooting up. What happened inside that tent? Breaking news. Donation alerts rang non-stop as the streamers fed on the moment. Then the cameras swung toward her. "Miss Beck, why did you leave the Burker Guild to associate with mythology? And now you're targeting Lee Hoyle too." In the middle of the chaos, Granfell Claudi Arpius stood still and silent, calmly analyzing the entire situation. What exactly is this supposed to be? Has the natural enemy trait triggered some kind of trap? Granfell Claudi Arpius wondered, his eyes narrowing slightly. He looked toward the cameras with open disdain, as if the very sight of them irritated him. Beside him, Beck Yiziel let out a quiet sigh and covered her mouth, trying to hide the mutter that slipped from her lips. The moment she noticed Granfell Claudi Arpius looking at her, she quickly tossed back her hair and forced herself to recover. Her expression smoothed over with practiced elegance, as though she could erase that brief crack in her composure simply by acting composed again. "Well, it seems we can't have a proper conversation here anymore," she said smoothly, as if nothing had happened. With a gaze full of fake warmth and false affection, she slid her hand onto his shoulder, trying to reclaim control of the mood. "Shall we go somewhere a little more private, Mr. Lee Hoyle?" she asked in a honeyed voice. Granfell Claudi Arpius paid no attention to her touch at all. Instead, he focused on the quiet whisper he had just heard, his attention shifting to something far more important than her act. His expression turned glacial in an instant, all trace of tolerance disappearing from his face. Then he opened his mouth and delivered an answer so cold and absolute that it was enough to make the entire crowd fall silent. Beck Yiziel's eyes widened with raw disbelief, then horror. Granfell Claudi Arpius stood there like an immovable mountain, utterly unmoved by her presence, her charm, or the pressure around him. "I have no time for people who do not understand the most basic courtesy of making an appointment first." His tone was flat, clean, and merciless, the kind of response that left no room for misinterpretation. He continued, his voice cutting straight through the noise like steel. "If you wish to speak with me, come back only after you have relearned your manners." A collective gasp swept through the crowd. Did he just reject her? People whispered in stunned disbelief. Beck Yiziel. Oh my God, look at her face. This is gold. Best Mana recap moment ever. The streamers laughed shamelessly, delighted by the humiliation unfolding in real time. Beck Yiziel was an ace of the massive mythology group and the guild master of mythology itself. She had more than 10 million followers, and every one of them knew her as untouchable. She was nothing less than an icon of the era. Whatever she wore, whatever she drank, whatever she so much as held in her hand became a trend the moment it was seen, selling out within minutes as people scrambled to copy her. She was the shining face of the Mythology Guild, a woman people spoke of like a living legend within the Korean Hunter Association. Her image carried influence, glamour, and power all at once. Everyone adored her. Everyone wanted her approval. To be acknowledged by Baek Yesil was something people treated like a prize in itself. Everyone wanted her. That was exactly why the title now spreading online hit so hard. Baek Yesil versus Lee Hoyle. The phrase alone was enough to ignite the entire internet in seconds. Who would win? That single question was already flooding every platform with comments, clips, and mocking reactions aimed at her. Then bang. The sound of impact rang through the room like a gunshot. She slammed her fist onto the table, eyes blazing with hatred so fierce it almost looked feverish. Why? Why didn't my charm work on that bastard Lee Hoyle? She screamed. Her voice echoed through the dark room, wild and shrill with rage. Unforgivable. I can't forgive him. I won't forgive him. Lee Hoyle, you piece of trash. How dare you make a fool out of me? She shrieked like a banshee, her voice breaking with fury. I'll kill you, Lee Hoyle. Lee Hoyle. Then, all at once, she grabbed her head with both hands. Stop it. The mirror in front of her shattered, jagged cracks exploding across its surface. Her reflection still stared back at her from the broken pieces. But the eyes in that reflection were no longer normal. They were glowing with a demonic red light, watching her with something cruel and alive behind them. The reflection curled its lips into a sneer. It was not the face of a frightened woman anymore, but something mocking, cold, and hungry. Shut your mouth, Baek Yesil. The voice that came from the mirror was twisted and contemptuous. You were the one who begged for my help, and now you want to act like you're the master of this body. From the darkness behind her, a ghostly arm with razor-sharp claws slowly materialized. How pathetic. Do you need me to lend a hand again? The voice taunted. At once, memories surged back through her mind. An endless dark abyss, the stench of death, and piles of corpses buried in shadow. A grotesque entity emerged from that memory and lifted her chin with terrible gentleness. You asked me to save you. It reminded her, its presence heavy and foul enough to make even the air feel rotten. You wanted to become number one, didn't you? The demon pressed its face close to hers, its eyes dripping with bloodlust. You said you wanted revenge on everyone who looked down on you. Every last one of them. You said you would do anything. And I gave you everything you asked for. Its voice was almost amused now, almost offended. So what exactly is the problem now? Baek Yesil stared at the broken mirror, her entire body trembling as she spoke. I never wanted this. Her voice was weak and shaken, like she barely believed her own words even as she said them. She suddenly stomped down on a shard of broken glass. No, it's not Lee Hoyle who should die. It's you. The demonic persona laughed harshly and yanked at her messy hair, savoring the chaos in her voice. What nonsense are you babbling now? It sneered. Who do you think got you this far? Even your own father called you a mistake. You ungrateful little wretch. Every word was sharp enough to cut. You should be thanking me. Then, in one violent motion, a shard of glass flew up into her hand. Without hesitation, Baek Yesil drove it straight into her own neck. Blood sprayed across the room in a hot, violent arc. The bright red splatter stained the floor, the wall, and the broken mirror alike. The demon's voice faltered in shock. Huh? The body is moving on its own. Is she insane? Clutching at the wound in her throat, Baek Yesil pressed her blood-covered hand against it as more blood spilled between her fingers.